Hello and welcome back to another installment of the Self-Care as Medicine Summit. Today I am really excited to introduce you to Sarah Klein, who is my yoga teacher. And the reason she's become my yoga teacher and what I've learned from studying with her is that yoga is so much more than what we do on the mat, which honestly hadn't occurred to me. And so she is a deep student of the Sutras, and I'll let her explain what that is better than what I can do. And the reason I called her in is because during one of her Shala practices, she was sharing about how the Yoga Sutras really talk about self-care and the importance of self-care and self-love. And so if you haven't had enough science-based evidence to get you going, I thought bringing in a tradition that's thousands of years old, that A, this is not just you, B, this is not something that's just part of our modern time. This has been a human challenge since stuff started being written down and not before. So I wanted to bring in Sarah as an expert on, what is yoga and how does that play into self-care? And so I've had her here to have a conversation with us. So thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to share some about yoga.
Great.
Kind of when I was preparing for this and thinking about the integration of self-care as medicine and where yoga fits in on that, and why yoga is truly a practice of self-care, because it's the practice of waking up. And when we wake up, we step into our power in the sense that we observe and can self-diagnose, self-prescribe, and really put ourselves responsible. 100% self-responsibility is what yoga is constantly telling us, which is a big glass to sip from. 100% self-responsibility for our health, but also for our thoughts, words, and actions.
Okay.
And so, why is yoga? It is the practice of self-care, right? It is in its practice, it is a practice of self-care because it's allowing us to listen to what we need and show up and take responsibility for it.
That's cool. That's really interesting because talk to me a little bit more about 100% self-responsibility. Aren't we all 100% responsible for ourselves?
Yes, we are, but do we accept it?
Oh, okay.
I think that's so common, and I think we are moving out of this mindset a little bit in the Western world, but we love the quick fix.
Yeah.
We love the Band-Aid. We love the pill. We love somebody to tell us what to do about our health and our well-being and how we should act. But the truth is we're the only ones with ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
And when we give that power away, we're also in it giving away our health because we're the only ones who truly know. But what the blockage is in listening, and not only listening, choosing to listen, but being able to listen. And this is where yoga comes in because our mind is whirling all the time. That's what it does. And that's what really separates us from other animals and species. And it's a beautiful thing. It's constantly thinking.
Potentially.
but it can also ruin us.
Yeah.
And when we aren't able to really discern between what is thought, what is self-limiting belief, what is projection, we miss the opportunity to see our brilliance and our inner wisdom and our inner knowing and the opportunity to listen to the body and say, hey, this is what I need. And then there's one listening and then two doing it. Okay. And so those are kind of separate.
Yeah, well, it's really, really different.
Yeah.
Because now we know, just go do, right?
Yeah. Okay, good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Why do we do what we do when we know what we know?
Right. We say that again.
Why do we do what we do when we know what we know?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we can all use that as a mantra. And for me, I know personally, and for the work that I do, is the answer to that is support and accountability.
Okay.
Why do we think we have to do this all by ourselves?
Okay.
And, I live in this world of yoga and health coaching, and I support my clients all the time in this. And I have support systems in place because if I don't, like this weekend, I'm going off to see my yoga teacher because if I don't have that accountability, I'm not going to show up in the same way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just from my own experience, when I first started going to yoga classes and all that sort of stuff, a couple of things. One, I thought I was going for a workout, just a different kind of workout. And two, I was very oriented towards what everybody else could do on my very tight hamstrings, as you know. And so I was pushing myself, and my husband, who's got a background in exercise phys, was saying that yoga is actually the activity where there's the most injury. So will you talk a little bit about what's the point of asana, or the actual poses?
Yeah. So what is asana? So first of all, the word asana, often translated as posture, but kind of incorrectly translated, it really translates more directly to taking your seat. Taking your seat. Now let's kind of back up and parking lot that for a second.
Okay.
What is yoga?
Yeah.
What is yoga? So the word yoga, often translated as union, well, union of what? Often thought of as union of mind, body, and spirit. And as my teacher, Annie Pace, will say, and this really resonates with me, is it's the unification, or the word yoke is how it's often translated to yoke, of this package, the mind, body, and the spirit, with that package. So divinity, connectivity with all beings, the planet, etc. And so if we look to the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali very clearly states what yoga is in the second sutra, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. And this is another Annie Paceism. Yoga is chitta, mind or consciousness, vritti, the constant whirling, twirling of the thoughts, the never-ending projections, self-limiting beliefs, stories. This, nirodha. And so yoga is the practice of discerning between what is true self, what is brilliance, what is the connection to the divine that's within all of us, because we're human in this human condition, and what is the thoughts, what is the thought patterns, what is the self-negating, self-limiting beliefs that are occurring. So that's what yoga is.
Okay. Well, that's kind of like a moment.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Right? Well, it is, but it's not taught that way.
Yes.
At least here in the States, that I've seen often.
And I know we've talked about this before in another presentation somewhere, that yoga is really in its infancy here in the United States. It's a teeny tiny little baby, right? It jumped the pond from a very spiritual culture in India. It's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and we're just figuring it out. And I do believe that as it seeps into our culture more and more, people are practicing. They're initially attracted to it because of the beauty, or, oh, my doctor told me I should do this, or, the simple truth that at baseline, our nervous systems are overfiring in this modern world, or the strength or the flexibility. And then as we start practicing with consistency and devotion, the yoga really starts to do us in a way. And we start to get more curious about, well, what is happening on the mat? Why do I feel like this? And we start asking the questions. And one of my teachers, Larry Schultz, would always say, live in the question. And live in the question in a way that you don't need the answer, but that you're always curious and you're always asking. And yoga really gives us a platform for that. So with, knowing what yoga is this process of really working this space and figuring out, can we live from our true nature, which is brilliance? And can we live beyond the self-negating thought patterns? And then, well, what is asana? So as I was talking about, it's to take your seat. It's to arrive and sit. Okay. And why would we want to arrive and sit? So that we can cultivate a space in this container to spontaneously, and of course with no attachment, because we're talking about yoga here, to spontaneously move into this connectivity, which is often translated as samadhi in the 8 limbs of yoga, this moment of inner knowing and feeling on a cellular level the connectivity to all things and the divine ultimately. And so asana, or if we look at the Yoga Sutras, Shtiram Sukham Asanam, I'm going to mess these numbers up. There's 196 sutras. And I think 4 to 6 actually talk about asanas.
Oh, really?
And when we really translate it, it means to take your seat.
Wow.
So that's something to chew on, right? Of like, what's going on here in this modern yoga, and can we penetrate that deeper?
Wow.
Do we have the bravery to penetrate deeper? Because
so 2% of the sutra what we, most of us experience as yoga.
Yeah.
It's most of it isn't about that at all.
Yeah. I mean, the asana is solely a technique so that we can find presence, right? We have this container that when we focus fully on the sensations of your favorite pose or your least favorite pose, or stretching your hamstrings or getting into a deep back bend, your presence drops into those sensations in such a way that the noise starts to turn down. And so it's a tool or a technique that we use to find the state of yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, the stillness. Mm-hmm. And so Shtiram Sukham Asanam, and hopefully, let me disclaimer, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar. I kind of just go for it.
I'm sold.
So I'm gonna be, if you are a Sanskrit scholar and I'm messing up some words, I apologize. I often say the deeper I go, the more I should be writing letters. I hear a lot of my teachers say this, and I really agree. Writing letters to all of my past students. I am so sorry, because it's a never-ending learning experience, and you hit this new awakening. You're like, what the freaking A have I been doing?
Sorry for what I said.
Sorry, guys. I apologize. We're all learning. But what asana is to find sweetness or ease or comfort within this seat, this focused seat, so that we cultivate a space internally that we can spontaneously move into the higher states of consciousness, higher states of realization. And that's really what the asana is to find sweetness, to find stillness, to hold the external container with ease so that the internal experience can slip into that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I know you may not know the answer to this, but what prompted the writing of the sutras or the verses?
Yeah.
I mean, why was this called for, and when? Because I think it's important to mark this in history.
Right. So I always kind of joke that yoga history is like the game of telephone. Oh, yeah. When you're like, I heard this.
Right.
And then by the end of the circle, it's like a total different story because you hear these little pieces and these little stories along the way, and you study with all these different peoples, and there's all these different lineages. But there's, not to get too deep into the story, but Patanjali is the author of the sutras, and then there's not debate, that's not the right word, but then there's stories of, is he a deity? And he's depicted as this man that's half human, half snake, and he has 10,000 serpent heads around him. So this is really where we get into the mysticism of yoga. Okay. But what kind of, to break it down and make it a little more tangible, what's always resonated with me is that in yoga philosophy, there's these yugas, and there's these giant time periods. And the energetics on the planet are different according to the yuga. And currently we're in a state of Kali Yuga, which is of chaos.
Yeah.
Stick in that. And in this, there's these three forms of energy. They're the three gunas. Everything that is born has these three forms of energy. You have them in different percentages throughout the day, throughout your lifetime, according to what you eat, what environment you're in. And you're constantly trying to tip the scale of these three energies. And because we're in Kali Yuga, currently the energy of tamasic, the downward pull energy, and rajasic, the energy of movement, are prevailing. And so sattvic is the one of harmony, peace, joy, upward flowing energy, is really not as abundant. Okay. And so Patanjali, yeah, it kind of does. Yes, it really kind of does. It actually gives me a lot of peace when I feel hopeless in what's happening in our world, or what's happening in our news, or when there's something that I feel hopeless on. What can I do? I find peace in knowing that there's this energetic pull that explains everything a little bit beyond me. And what I can do is I can get on my mat and lift my personal energy field, lift my sattvic, and know that adds to the collective.
Oh, cool. I love that.
Yeah, that helps me when, shit hits the fan.
Right.
You just want to go cry or you're like fearful, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it gives maybe a little power to the self.
Yeah.
So Patanjali was cursed to teach the Western mind, the Kali Yuga period yoga. And so before, it wasn't written down, it was taught, if my game of telephone is correct that I've heard, it was taught, never written down, it was taught by memorization. And sutra means thread. And you can think of, so the sutras are basically these bullet points. They're 196 bullet points of, now we practice yoga. Yoga is this. When you do this, you experience this. When you don't do that, you experience that. The mind has this, blah, blah, blah. It's very, very direct. And so before Patanjali, at least what my understanding is that it was taught by memorization, word, mouth to ear. And then he wrote it down because the world was becoming a little more chaotic. And he's like, this needs to be recorded. And he was cursed to teach. So his sutras were what we would be gifted in this Kali Yuga period.
Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So are there any sutras in particular that speak to taking care of the self, or are they all kind of, if the whole point of yoga is to slow down and be more present, which then kind of inherently invites in more self-inquiry and connection?
Yeah, I think in the way that we talk about self-care kind of today, maybe not as direct, but the whole book of the sutras is about understanding the self and understanding the self as well as the unity within. So it's been around for a really, really long time. And that number is kind of, you'll read it different in different places, but it's prevalent today as it was 500 years ago. Yeah. And it's the process of really self-awakening and knowing thyself on a deep, deep level, and knowing that as you clear through that, you find this connectivity with the divine within you. And, you can use that word divine however you resonates with you. Yeah.
Well, and not everybody here has a yoga practice or has been exposed to yoga. So if anyone's interested in yoga, are there any sutras that a newer student might connect with?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of going through the first 4, and I've heard it talked on of a keen student wouldn't need to go any further because the first 4 really explain it. But, just like it's a web. It's not this linear learning.
Okay.
It's each sutra can be reinforced by all of them, and each one holds the wisdom of them all. And I do believe that is very true.
Oh, wow.
And so, yes, reading it from front to back is, a good idea. But at the same time, reading it and flipping it open and reading one sutra at a time really can be profound as well. And so the first 4 kind of really give the foundation for what yoga is. And the first one is now the practice of yoga begins, in the sense that the invitation for this auspicious moment, the invitation to practice yoga is here. And then we have Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which Patanjali very clearly states that yoga is a process of discerning between the thoughts, the swirling and twirling of the mind, and the true self. And then it's Tara Drashtahu Swarupe Bashtanam. And the beauty of it is, tada, is when you do that, when you're in a state of yoga, you reside in your brilliance. You reside in your true nature. Then the next one, Vritti Sarupyam Itarahatra, is when you don't do that, when you're not in a state of yoga, you believe that you are the fluctuations of the mind, which can be self-limiting or self-negating or also self-building of, oh, they don't understand me, or whatever the story may be. I'm more than that. They don't get me, or So ego. Right. So in that, it's saying, like, in your true nature, because you're here as a divine being, you can reside in your brilliance. If you have the bravery to look beyond the fluctuations of the mind, which we all have all the time. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we could really invite this yoga practice in, because I think that busy mind is it's like an epidemic at this point. I mean, I don't use that word lightly, but I feel like we see it everywhere, the sense of stress and overwhelm and to-do lists and always feeling behind and rushing and all of these things. And I think so many of us can relate to being in that way. But I mean, I know I spend more time identifying with my thoughts. Like I need to do this, I need to take care of that, I need to whatever, rather than just being present to what's here. So, we can start having our yoga practice. Again, a theme that we've been talking about, if you've been watching some of these other videos, is the idea of engaging in whatever practice you're talking about out of a self-love and a desire for self-connection, not to fix or get stronger core or get more flexible or whatever. So if we approach yoga from this, like, I'm going to invoke this practice to see myself more clearly, that's really different.
Yeah. So two things. One, Kaylee Gifford, who is a dear, dear friend and colleague and an amazing yoga teacher here in Durango, says we are human beings, but we get caught up in being human doings. Yeah. And that's always really resonated with me. And then the other thing is Mr. Iyengar would talk about the two wings of yoga, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about this, Vairagya and Abhyasa. And so, if you are flying and you only have one wing, well, you're going to go down. So you want both of these to balance things out.
Okay.
And that analogy has always really resonated with me. But Abhyasa is showing up and doing the work. Do the tools and the techniques of the practice, which whatever is your practice could be running, it could be being out in nature, it could be
journaling.
Exactly. There's many, but you do the work with consistency and devotion over a really, really long period of time. But you show up. What is consistency? That's not twice a week. That's every day. And with full devotion, as well as over a really, really long time. And in yoga philosophy, how they talk about it often is lifetimes of this work, lifetimes. And so it's like, okay, next lifetime, I'll get to that one. Plenty of time. And then Vairagya is with non-attachment. Okay. So releasing the grip of obtaining the fruits of your work. And
it's hard.
Well, yeah. Yoga's not easy, okay?
Yeah. And it's not just the headstand things that are hard.
No. And the practice that my lineage base is Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga, which is a very physically demanding asana practice. And the way I look at it is it's hard for a reason, because one, where I am in my life, it wrings me out. It wrings out my nervous system in this way that it leaves me still after it. Okay. But also it demands this presence. The tools and the techniques of the practice demand that the mind drop into the here and the now, and the noise start to slow down. And, hopefully in the next, 25, 30 years, I'll be at a point where I don't need the rigidity of that power. It's not power yoga, but strength of the practice, so that I can, still find that still space without needing to wring out my nervous system, sweat and all that.
Yeah. Work so hard.
Yeah. But yeah, it's difficult for a reason.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
But you're also missing the point if you're going beyond your edge, because you're trying to find sweetness in the asana. Right. And if you practice in pain or you practice beyond your edge, there's no way that you can find a state of yoga.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that speaks to, like when I started, trying to go beyond and trying to do whatever because I wanted to look like this, or I wanted to have this certain pose. And now 20 years into my very on and off again practice, I'm like, I've got really tight hamstrings. No matter how much I stretch, every morning I wake up and I cannot touch my toes. It's just the way that it is. And maybe with more dedicated practice that would change. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that my intention has shifted. you know, I'm not necessarily needing to be in really advanced poses in order to get my fix on the mat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And this has been a really live for me. I heard Bhavani Maki say that, and I think it actually is a quote from somebody else, but that's how I heard of it. And that's really an interesting thing. And when we're talking about self-care on the mat, and one of the many reasons I love yoga so much is it has this container where you show up, you train the subconscious, you train the nervous system, and you do this ancient art and science that does you, so that off the mat you can hopefully have half of a chance of really living your yoga. Right. So it becomes this laboratory for self-exploration, and you can take all the theory and the philosophy and apply it onto the mat, and then hopefully in a way, you know, trick yourself into doing it off the mat. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. In the asanas can be so profound. Just because you can do that posture doesn't mean it's good for you today. Right. And just because you can find your edge, can you actually do the yoga well at or beyond your edge? And what is yoga? And are you doing yoga if you're pushing your body that hard? Probably missing the point. Right. And Patanjali talks about that a lot. Like, watch out, you might just completely miss the point of this whole thing. Yeah. And then, you know, when we're talking about self-care as medicine, just because I have 2 hours free in my week doesn't mean I have to book them. Or just because I got invited to that doesn't mean I have to go. Right. And, you know, in this human doing experience that we see so common today, where the nervous system, you know, the biology of it is that the nervous system is out of whack, and the nervous system is really the key, in my belief, is to healing and wholeness and wellness. We've got to learn how to, just because we can, doesn't mean we should.
Yeah. Well, and if you're going to your edge or beyond without that deeper intention of connecting to self, then I think that is where injury or overextension or fatigue or just missing it completely
missing the point. Yeah. And so one of the beautiful tools of yoga, kind of to circle back on what Kevin was saying on injury, is the breath is truly the foundation to the practice. And in the Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga system, absolutely, it's one of the key pillars. And the breath is so intertwined with the nervous system that if we are not fully breathing in the posture, that's our nervous system saying, hey, you're going too far. So you have this very specific feedback system integrated deeply into the practice that will tell you, you know, if you're going too far. And if you trust your breath 100%, because it's intertwined to your nervous system, you won't hurt yourself. And I do see that in our modern yoga world is fluffing of the ego, clinging to the asanas, and completely missing the point. Right. Yeah. In that yoga asana practice is really to break the ego, and if you do it in certain ways, it will. Yeah. You know, it will break your ego, and that's, we want our ego to lie down in a specific way.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, personally, I want you to go back to that third sutra and say a little bit more about that, because I'm like, ooh, I want to talk about the brilliant self, because we don't all believe that.
Right. And you all are brilliant. And
as is.
Just as you did. No more certificates needed. No more partner needed. Not a certain poundage.
Yeah. And you can do your yoga every day, and it doesn't make you more or less brilliant.
No. Yeah, truly. It's yoga is the practice of remembering where we came from and where we're going. And I'll say this kind of often in class. I'll drop this, and some people, it might be like, oh, what are you talking about? In this human experience, we are perfectly imperfect, and that's why we're here. On the next dimension is the perfection. Don't worry, you're all going there.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I mean, that sutra is basically saying that when we have these moments that we slip into a state of yoga where we're able to truly discern with wisdom. And between what is this thought pattern, well, first of all, what is the pattern? Those are really interesting. The loops. Can we wake up to them? And then when we're able to wake up to them and label them, they lose their hook. They lose their power over us because it's, oh, that's another form of vritti. Okay, moving on.
Vritti is the thoughts.
The thoughts,
okay.
yeah. The churning, the swirling of the mind.
Okay. That seems so easy to just start catching it and like being like, oh, that's just the vritti. Now we have a word for it. It's easy.
Yeah, and you can label it. Yeah. And in that, where do I want to go with that? The intention of yoga or mindfulness practices is to start to watch the nature of the mind. And it's an extremely lofty goal to stop the movements of the mind. So when I teach it, I like to just like put that off the island. Maybe someday. Don't rush there. In the sense of let the goal be watching the fluctuations of the mind, and where mindfulness resides is noticing where the mind gets hooked on a fluctuation or a vritti or a thought and goes down this rabbit hole, right? We all know this. It's like, she looked at me that way. Oh my God, I should have worn a different outfit. Or like, she obviously doesn't think that I should be here and I'm really not good enough to be doing this presentation right now. And the rabbit hole just, boom, it goes. And when you start to watch the nature of the mind, it will, on a dime, switch its opinion. Oh, actually, you know what? I should be here. And like, what is she thinking? And what are those boots that she's wearing? Like it can, and then it will go back and it will go back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. And that's the nature of the mind. We all have that. And so what mindfulness practices are releasing the hook in the sense that as the mind starts to travel into the story, the projections, et cetera, we just say, oh, I'm noticing that. And then I bring it back into the present moment, where if you're doing asana, you bring it back into the posture. If you're doing a mindfulness-based practice using your breath, you bring it back to your breath. You bring it back to the sensations of your body. You bring it back to your mantra, whatever type of practice you're doing, you bring it back. And that is the practice, bringing and being able to bring it back.
And I think that's the huge thing, right? Is when we catch ourselves, not judge ourselves for having gone there.
Yeah, because we're all doing it. Right? Yeah, and catching yourself is something to celebrate. Yeah. That's huge. Because when you can catch it, then you can label it and it loses its power over you. Yeah.
Well, and I think, when I was first learning meditations, one of the things that I was taught was that expecting the mind not to think is like asking water not to be wet. It's just the nature of the stuff. It's just going to be. And so meditation or yoga isn't the practice of shutting down the mind. I think a lot of people feel like they're only successful in mindfulness when they're not thinking anything, but that's not it. It's that the train's coming through the station and you stay on the platform and the thought train keeps going. Perfect. And you're like, oh, here's another train. Oh, here's an express train. I know where that train's going, and you just get to watch them go by rather than step on and go for the ride.
Totally. And I know you've talked about this a lot, and this is very embedded in yoga philosophy as well, is becoming very intimate with our thoughts, in the sense that we're studying them, we're watching them, we're learning about them, but we're also discerning between them and getting really intimate so that, again, they lose their grip, they lose their power. Because when we stuff them, that's the most dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So first is the stuffing and then it's the projecting. And that's where yoga asks us to take 100% self-responsibility. Am I projecting my thoughts onto something else? Or can I take 100% self-responsibility for my thoughts, words, and actions?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know when you and I were doing a retreat together, I want to go back to, I'm kind of bouncing around.
Yeah,
here.
of course.
That's what we do. Here's my mind.
This is how conversation happens.
But I remember talking about consistency, because that's something that you said. And I think a lot of us, when we hear like every day, go like, I don't have time for that. And I don't always get up early enough. And half an hour of sleep is more important than 20 minutes of practice, or whatever. But I remember you saying that, and I was like, well, let me just check this out. And I would say I've been 80% consistent.
You know, huge, that's something to celebrate. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it makes such a huge difference in my day. So do you have any words for us as we're trying to move into this consistency and routine-based place that a lot of us don't have anymore? You know, work is changing, hours of work are changing, working from home, you know, all these different, you know, working shifts, or, you know, there's all these different ways people are working that are different than the old 9 to 5, and everybody's kind of on the same schedule. Like, so how do we invite that consistency in my opinion, ever more chaotic culture?
A mantra that I use, or a statement that helps me, is consistency over duration. Okay. I would any day rather have a client do 5 minutes of some form of mindfulness-based practice instead of 2 hours twice a week. And you can think of it as the seed to peace, or the touch point to your inner brilliance, or in a more tangible aspect, the touch point to your nervous system, to the system that creates healing and well-being and focus, and a focused mind and productivity. And, you know, it's consistency. So what we want to do is to create some form of practice that is really doable for us, and commit to 5 minutes a day. Because that's bringing you to that gem, that touch point, that seed of peace. And once you touch it, it stays with you. And so it's the toning of the nervous system, and, you know, making that commitment to yourself. We all have 5 minutes a day, right? No matter how busy you are, you have 5 minutes a day. Right? We could even say, take 5 minutes out of your social media scrolling. We all have 5 minutes. It's just a matter of making the mind shift that just a little bit is way better than none. And just a little bit will start to become a lot of it. Where you get onto the mat, and what one of my teachers, Annie Pace, will say is the yoga time gods will figure things out for you. So you get onto the mat,
which is the hardest part.
Showing up is the hardest part. And then you start doing, and you do as much as you can, and know that that's enough. You did it. I've also heard, and I don't know who it was on a podcast somewhere, someone talking about this analogy of imagining your antenna and your practice is refining that connection. So it's that touch point, right? It's, you got to commit to creating the still space so that you can really tap in to something bigger, which is your ultimate self and your true self. Another thing that can be really helpful is to find a space. So make all obstacles overcomable. Yeah. Go away. And so if you have one consistent space in your house, and it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be perfect, and make it a sacred space where it's clean, and you have maybe a candle or a piece of inspiration, make an altar, something that really resonates with you, so that when that time comes, you step into that space. That can be really, really helpful. Practicing the same space from a traditional standpoint is really beneficial as well for a lot of reasons. Practicing at the same time is also really good for for creating new habits, as well as for the practice. I even have clients set reminders on their phone. It's like, okay, if I didn't get my practice in the morning, and I'm not going to get it in at night, at least give me my 5-minute mindfulness practice where I close everything down, I step away, and I focus on my breath.
Awesome. Wow. Okay. Any other gems that you want to share from the sutras?
I don't know. I mean, there's
lots.
Much. There's so much. I mean, the 8 limbs are another aspect that are within the Yoga Sutra and are really important within the yoga philosophy. And you could we could talk about the 8 limbs for 5 hours. We could easily do a 5-hour presentation on them. But to kind of really briefly roll over them, it's yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. And they're not necessarily a ladder. We're working on them all at the same time, and they're more like a web. And the yamas and the niyamas have many aspects to them, but to kind of, really briefly explain what they are, yamas are be a good person. The first one is ahimsa, nonviolence. And so it's our moral, ethical code of being a good person. Niyama, ni means to go in. And there's a variety of aspects to the niyamas, but it's showing up in a way that you're starting to look internal and clear the inner garden so a spiritual life can grow. Or we could even say, so we have the motivation to practice self-care, right? It's clearing the inner space. So it's things like contentment and purity. Yama, niyama, asana, right? There's 8 of these. 1 is asana. Take your seat, do the practice. Pranayama, prana is life force energy. Yama is to direct or move. So it's the breath work practice. So these all start as things that we can really show up and do. Asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Now we're starting to get a little more heady, if you will. Pratyahara is sense internalizing, pulling the 5 senses in. So if we're working to find a state of yoga, stillness internally, we have to recognize that our 5 sense organs are a part of this mind, body, spirit experience, because they're constantly going out, pulling, taking information and pulling it back in, which is brilliant when we're driving, walking down the street, doing our work. But when we're looking to find a state of yoga, we've got to notice that those 5 sense organs, we've got to pull in to find focus. And this is where we can really start to discern and show up for ourselves. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana. So dharana is single pointed focus. And so this is kind of getting to what we were just talking about, is the ability to hold your mind in one place. Single pointed focus. Dharana, dhyana is when non-duality occurs. So the thing that we're focusing on, we become one with. So it's this connectivity to all things. And then samadhi is when the thing that we're focusing on is the divine, and we become one with the divine. So the way I think of the 8 limbs, again, is it's this almost circular web-like experience, and we're working on all these things to clear the inner garden so that spontaneously and with no attachment, we can move into this moment of realization of the brilliance within inside of us. And once we touch that space, we touch that seed, we carry it with us forever, and really no one can take it away. And that's where we can start to get into, well, why do I do what I do when I know what I know? And can I show up for me in a big way? Because when I show up for me in a big way, I also am showing up for everyone around me in a big way.
So much more to offer. Thank
Okay.
you so much. This is
Thank you
awesome.
for having me.
I mean, I think my biggest takeaway for those of you who are watching and maybe don't have a consistent practice or don't have any yoga practice is it's not, if you come into it with this new awareness of what yoga really is, which is the awareness of our thoughts and then the quieting of them, and that it's not necessarily about what you look like in yoga pants or which how crazy you can get on your arm balances. It's really more of an internal process, and I think that makes yoga so much more accessible to everybody, rather than someone with a certain body type or athletic background or a certain woo-woo inclination or whatever. It's like, no, this is just another way to access yourself. Cool. Well, thanks so much. We'll be sure to connect you and Sarah if you want to learn more about her. You can find her at wholehealthlab.com, and she does retreats. We partner for retreats, so there's lots of opportunities to play in this more, which I really recommend, because like I said, I've been studying with Sarah 3 or 4 years, but I've been studying yoga 20 years before that, and this is a whole nother level of my practice, and like really the first time I've been this consistent, because I'm understanding that it's not just about, okay, I touched my toes.
Right. Yeah, totally. And we're linking a free offer, which is called Rebooting Your Nervous System. And it's some guided meditations and some food actually that you can eat to really support your system in this Kali Yuga.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. We'll talk to you all soon. Thanks. Bye.